Does it say it's live? Yeah. Okay. Hello, all of you out there who are watching us on the web. We have a few people here in the building. As you know, we have our interactive Bible study. You're right, it's going live. And I'm going to share it to my page. Share it with my friends. Join us for Bible study. Okay. All right. We've had a good week. Sunday was really good, wasn't it? We had a good resurrection celebration on Sunday. Very glad to see so many people here, so many who we have missed, and then some new people, some visitors that we're blessed to have and get to meet people. And it was just great. Leanne's here, and of course, she's been getting all kinds of compliments. John, who was on the praise team, everyone, the whole praise team just did a marvelous job on Sunday. Our kids, the pastor, everything. It was, if that was a day to have a big crowd, it was a perfect day for it, because we really it just was a good day. So thank you all who tuned in on Sunday, those of you who were here. It was just great. Wish we could do it like that every Sunday, but every Sunday we do have something pretty awesome. So this Sunday we'll have 9 and 11 a.m. service, and we look forward to those of you being with us. Also on Saturday we have car wash, Southside Next Car Wash from 11 to 1 at Tijuana Flats on West Colonial. So I know they would appreciate you coming by and supporting them. And then we have a few other things I may mention at the end of the lesson, but I'll go ahead and get started on the lesson. As you know, we've been talking about servanthood for a few months, and under the topic of, if you see something, do something. And good to see you, Lee. Thanks for being here. Okay. Good to see you again. So this lesson tonight ties into servanthood, and it's called Loving and Serving Our Neighbors. And we're just going to dive into it. I'm going to tell you that this is an outline. A lot of this is derived from a book that I have been looking at called The Art of Neighboring, Building Genuine Relationships Right Outside Your Door, by Jay Pathak, Dave Runyon, Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But before we get started, I just want to pray and ask God to bless this lesson, help us to learn what we need to learn from it, to glean what we need to glean from it as we move forward. When I was first thinking about doing this lesson, that was the title that I thought of. It doesn't tie in as much with servanthood, but moving forward. After we have a Sunday like we had Sunday, we think, okay, we're getting back to this place that we were a year and a half ago. What does moving forward look like? What are the things that we can take and build now that we're getting close to that again? But I think there's some valuable things in this lesson as we move forward. So we want to talk about that tonight. So let me just pray real quick. God, I pray that you would open our hearts tonight. God, that you would help us to learn what we need to learn. God, that you would give us a desire that is spelled out in this book, God, to love people and to engage with people and to share the good news with people who need it, God. We just pray that we would impact this community, we would impact our neighborhoods with your love, God, and with your hope. So thank you tonight, God, for allowing us to be here. And we love you, we serve you, we want to do what we can to please you. We want to live our lives pleasing to you. So help us tonight, God, as we move forward based on principles from your word. In your name we pray. Amen. So tonight we're going to just talk about little things that make a big difference and who is our neighbor. So some of the main ideas in this session, we're going to learn what it means to be a good neighbor to the people who are nearest us. We're going to, our change in our head is going to be to know God's expectations for us in serving and loving our neighbors. And then to feel the desire for connections with families that are next door to us. And then to commit to regular engagement with the people next door by taking the great commandment seriously. So I want to ask you, and if you want to be ready to swipe it, because somebody may have to take the mic as we talk. Sometimes it'll pick up here, but it may be better to use the mic. Can someone describe an interesting or memorable interaction you've had with someone in your neighborhood that was unexpected? What were the circumstances of the interaction, and what kind of relationship was formed? An unexpected relationship, an unexpected circumstance in your neighborhood, maybe where you met your neighbors, and what changed going forward after that? Anyone? You don't have any neighbors. You don't. You got cows and.
We don't have very many neighbors.
You can sit with the mic if you want.
I don't know if this is on.
Is it on?
It should be.
It sounds like it might be. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have a lot of neighbors. One time somebody was going into the mailbox across the street from the neighbor, and John kind of said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And kind of just to make sure that he really was, and then let the neighbor know. And then years went by, and they brought us some mangoes this last year. So I sent them a thank you note for the mangoes, and then they brought us some more mangoes, so that was really nice. So that's about it.
Well, I think about we haven't had interaction here. When the last time when we had drive-through prayer, the man who lives across the street, and I want to say his name is Jack. Do you know, Lee? The one with the horses?
Joe,
Roger met him at a McDonald's, told us about him, and then when we were out here, he was riding his horse around, getting his horse exercise. So we had a little bit of interaction with him, exchanged our names. You know, that's the first level of communication. And then you talk a little bit, you know, if you've ever studied communication, you have the layer, you know, the first layer is names, and then you talk about the facts. The facts is the weather. It's beautiful weather or whatever. Then, you know, don't necessarily get to the main, you know, the deep levels. The next layer would be feeling, you know, I'm feeling really good because I got a promotion at work or whatever, you know, and then, so anyway, we at least advanced, you know, past our names, you know, so that was a relationship, so that next time we see him out riding his horse, we would have an opening. We would say, oh, by the way, remember we brought the kids out, you showed them the horse, you let them pet the horse, that kind of stuff. It kind of creates an opening for later, not necessarily to finish and forge a deep relationship right then, but look for openings. So we all know that Jesus desires for us to love our neighbors. We've all heard the great commandment and understand that the neighbor can be anyone that we come in contact with. But taking the next step to engage with strangers around us can be intimidating and sometimes uncomfortable. You've heard me say, even as we came into Resurrection Celebration, to start inviting people to church. And we did that in our neighborhood. But there's a certain amount of trepidation. Why is that? Because I've said that when I talked about it, it's not like we're asking them on a date, right? None of us are going around asking anybody for a date. And you know how nerve-wracking that is when you're like, oh, it's more of a personal rejection Well, we take it as a personal rejection when we invite somebody to church or we make a connection that they're not connecting with. Leanne and I, there have been people that we've met and they were friendly to everybody else in the world. And we, we're like, okay, we're going to be friendly too, and they're not friendly to us, and that's very personal. It feels very personal, like a personal rejection. So we start looking, what is it about us? Are we too good looking for them or whatever? Anyway, you can't hear it online, but there are hundreds of people here laughing at my jokes here in the building. So anyway, there's just so much there's so much personal wrapped up into it, and it doesn't have to be that way. When you're making a connection, you're not an ambassador for yourself. You're an ambassador for God. You're not trying to advance your own agenda. You're advancing the Great Commission. Yet we get our personal wrapped up in it, and so that's why we're nervous to talk to somebody. In this book, and there's a video that goes along with it, but I didn't want to play the video because I didn't want it to get kicked off Facebook if it had any kind of copyright to it, and I'm just going to summarize what was said. Also, I didn't know if I could get it played where people online could see it, but the authors were talking about, one of the authors was talking about that they hosted a group of pastors at their church. They had different pastors in their area just to get together and say, how can we impact this community? How can we be better pastors of this community, of, small town USA? So all the pastors from that town get together, they're having a meeting, and somebody had the idea, let's invite the mayor. Let's invite the mayor to come. And so the mayor came, and they asked the mayor, what can we do as members of the faith community to help this community? In your opinion, what can we do? And the neighbor said, if you guys could start some type of neighboring group, it would solve every problem we have. A neighboring group, basically community connection. And so the authors were saying, can you believe that the mayor of this town is telling a group of pastors to do what Jesus told us to do? The government is telling us this is what we need to be doing, and this is what we need to be doing. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in everything else, we kind of miss the simplicity of the gospel, the simplicity of what Jesus wanted us to do. So that's what the mayor was saying. And so when they walked around there, they said it was just life-changing for them. It just totally changed everything because they realized that connection, the community connection, the relationships is so vital to impacting a community. How can we impact a community without relationships? Leanne and I, we met, the first time we met him in person, Rick Warren was asked at the Dove Awards, we were backstage. At that point, he was coming a little bit under fire for reaching out to Muslims, reaching out to the Islam community, and basically befriending them. And they were like, somebody stood up and said, Pastor Warren, is that Southside Church calling? Is it really? Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was a one call since everybody was called. But there was like Pastor Warren, somebody in there, who had just kind of been troubled by that. You're reaching out to another religion, doesn't this dilute your message? And he says, you can't win your enemies. You can win your friends to the Lord, but you can't win your enemies to the Lord. So basically he was saying, you can't look at them as their enemies. You have to turn your enemies into your friends, and then you can impact them with the Lord. So that was powerful to me because that's his motivation. He's trying to win them for the Lord. He's not trying to dilute, and I'm not here to take up for him, but that was his motivation. We find excuses for not touching people because of where they're at. And Jesus gave us a pattern in Scripture about reaching people. And it's in Luke 10, starts with 25. This is a discourse. One day, an expert in the law stood up to test him. Lee, do you want to read this? You're kind of our Bible reader, aren't you?
I don't have my Bible with me. I'm just thinking if I turn on and start talking.
Oh, okay. I'll read it.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. One day, an expert in the law stood up to test him. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus replied. How do you read it? Jesus said, and this is a very familiar passage, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus said. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? Jesus took this question and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the same road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So too, when a Levite came to that spot and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But when a Samaritan on a journey came upon him, he looked at him and had compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Take care of him, he said, and on my return I will repay you for any additional expense. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? The one who showed him mercy, replied the expert in the law. Then Jesus said, go and do likewise. Jesus stretches the definition of neighbor to include your enemies. That's stretching it. That's the widest definition of your neighbor. But tonight, we're going to go more elementary. We're going to go more, as the authors say, we're going to take it to the kindergarten level. We're going to go to the first level of this. We're going to talk about our physical neighbors. Now, John and Karen, you may get a pass on this, but they suggested a tic-tac-toe board. If you see this, in the middle is your home. So you think about it, on both sides of your house, you have 2 people on the same side of your house, on the left and the right. Then you have people across the way. You have people catty corner from you. Basically 8 houses that are around you. So, not to put anybody on the spot, I'll pass these out later. Basically write the names of the 8 houses, the neighbors of the 8 houses around you. Could you do that? Lee, could you do that? Probably not. I know I can't. As you know, last week I went out to the neighborhood and invited a bunch of people to resurrect, but I didn't ask their names. We know by faces, but I didn't ask the names. And so even while I'm studying for this lesson and reading over it, I'm like, I need to ask names. There's something special about asking a name and knowing a name. John, if you came in here every Sunday, and every Sunday I said, hey bro, hey dude, hey man, after a while you would start thinking, he doesn't know my name. You know, we're on this level, and we should be on this level, you know. Especially if I spend time in your house, then you'd be like, he still doesn't know my name, you know. It's very humbling when you don't know somebody's name. And it's tough to remember it, especially in a congregation of 100 people or more. It's tough to learn, but over time, it's worth it. And especially with your neighbors, as we're talking here. when we're saying to love our neighbors, it starts the point, it's the starting point for some people to feel loved and accepted and acknowledged. Don't you feel loved when someone remembers your name? Everybody, would you nod your head? Yeah. Loved. Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, because if they say John, in a derogatory term, but you wouldn't feel love if somebody didn't know your name. It doesn't automatically connotate love. It changes everything when you know somebody's name. The authors in part of the video that I didn't play, but I'll tell you about it. One of the authors is talking about he is in a church, and they're having small group night, and he had a long and difficult day at the church. He was ready to just go home and kick his feet up and watch TV and veg out. And when he got home, his wife said, or maybe he called her on the way home and said, I'm just coming home, I've had a terrible day. And she said, well, it's small group night. And he's like, cancel it, we're not doing it, because I am just burnt out, I don't want to do it. And she's like, we can't cancel it, we just can't do that, it sets a terrible precedent. And he said, well, I just don't feel like getting up and speaking or anything. So she says, we'll just turn it into a barbecue, a party or something, So when he got home, he said he lived in an apartment that had like a courtyard outside. And as he was coming home, there were all these people in the courtyard talking about, and he was having to move, kind of get around them and stuff, and they had plates of food. And as he got closer to his apartment, people are going in and out of his house. And he realized that it was the barbecue that he had told his wife to have. So he said, because of that, they kind of became pastors of the neighborhood. They established these relationships kind of accidentally, but people, when they find out you're a pastor, they find out you're in a church, not that you hide it, but when they find out you're active in a church, well, I'm on the worship team, or I do this, or I'm a small group leader in my church. When people have spiritual problems, they will come to you. Or when they have some kind of spiritual question, right? So that's part of your identity. So when you become that identity in your neighborhood, then it opens ministry opportunities. And yet, so many of us, myself included, are intimidated to go out and lead with, I'm a pastor at a church. Why is that? It's because you feel that personal rejection. Sometimes we become so consumed with our convenient relationships, like the ones we have with coworkers, college friends, people in our small groups, that we don't even think about the strangers that we walk past every day. And get ready, this is a question I'm going to need somebody to answer. In what ways can our love for convenience and comfort keep us from being the type of neighbors that God has called us to be? Anybody want to answer that? Well, let me do this one. How can we, or do you want to answer that?
Ask the question one more time because I'm wrong.
In what ways can our love for convenience and comfort keeping us from being the kind of neighbors God called us to be?
It's easier just to be around people that you're comfortable with and that you know, because you really expect it. You have to take the extra effort of going out. Sometimes through John's work, we go to a different party where we don't really know a lot of people. But the amazing thing there is that everyone is purposely like talking to people that they don't know, interacting with people that they don't know. At church, we have a tendency to do that because it's kind of ingrained within us to a certain degree. Okay, there's a new person, you need to go and talk to them and make them feel welcome. people are trying to talk to each other, trying to network, trying to get to know each other better. But it does take an effort. You got to think of something to say.
Right.
You can't just sit in your corner and do what you normally do. You've got to, and risk rejection as well.
And don't you think and we've talked about this, I've talked about this, maybe not with you guys, but I've talked about this, the opportunities to meet people outside your circle seem to shrink the older you get, because you get in these patterns, and that's a fact of life. That's not like something sinful, but we get in different things. So we don't necessarily encounter, like my girls, they're going to have a whole new group of friends every year they're in school, because it mixes up. Then they're going to go to a new school. They're going to have a whole different set of friends. Their circles are constantly changing. It feels like your circles constantly change to you, like you're in your 20s, and even maybe a little bit to your 30s as you change jobs and stuff. But then when you get settled in your jobs, your circles seem like they close a little bit, and your interaction with people. So it becomes, to me, it has to become a little bit more intentional to break outside your circles. Living in Cleveland, for us, Cleveland, Tennessee, which people have called the buckle on the Bible Belt before, because everybody there and their cat is Christian or go to church. That's a misnomer, of course, because I was on the grand jury in Cleveland for a year, and it's very eye-opening to know all the crime that goes on. But there are a lot of people in the circles that we traveled in that, in the public school, the teacher goes to a church where we know people. It's just a small community, highly concentrated. Lee is continually feeding people who want to stay there, so everybody has a story like that. But an area like this, it's less of a percentage, and so it's more opportunity to impact people who are not already Christian. The author in that story said his life changed because he started to take the Great Commandment so seriously. What steps can we take to make the Great Commandment more serious in our own life? What can we do? And I've mentioned a few of them, but how do we impact people with the Great Commandment? We do this at church on Sunday, but what we do on Sunday is we create a worship experience and for people who can come in. But how do we create opportunities to go out? Does anybody have ideas?
I was sitting there thinking about what you'd said. I remember a while back, one of our neighbors at the end of one of the streets, I was pulling out and going down, and I happened to see an ambulance there. And so I don't really know that was, so I pulled over. I knew they had a new baby. So I pulled over and I stopped and I said, "Can I do anything to help? Is everything okay?" And they said, "Well, she's having problems with the baby." So I kind of made myself open to be able to help them, and then the next day I stopped by, I saw him out, and I said, "Is everything okay?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I really do appreciate you." So since that time, he waved, and we kind of bonded, kind of made a connection. And I think, you hear of someone maybe losing someone or someone that's ill, maybe you could fix something and take it over to them. Is that what you're talking about?
Right,
Maybe
yeah, just anything where you
there's so many
impact
things that
strength.
we can do.
Mm-hmm.
I have a neighbor that works at Four Rivers, and so we kind of connected because he knows that I have several at my house. And so he'll call me at night and say, "Hey, can I bring something by?" And so he leaves Four Rivers, he brings a chicken by, and all that, and that's great. So we really bonded.
Call the Hambys next time.
We really made a good connection.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways, just a handshake sometime, or a handshake, or
Right.
a wave, or something, or a smile.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't get that anymore, so I think just doing that sometimes just saying, hey, I hope you have a great day, a blessed day, and whatever. So just putting ourselves out there and not being afraid of being rejected.
Right. I think one of the things we do a lot, and maybe y'all can agree or disagree, but a lot of people reach out to their servers at restaurants. Like they may stop because they've never met this person before, and I've been with people who I knew a guy who used to grab the server's hand and make them say the blessing with him, and it cracked me up. He was about 85 years old, like a grandpa, and she would be taking the order, and he would grab her hand. He's like, "We're going to say the blessing," and she would have to stay there with her eyes closed. So that was pretty funny. And a lot of people, that's their interaction. But some of the other things, we just brainstorm. How do we get out into the community? And I think we've talked about that. Leanne had suggested maybe if there are moments where we can sponsor a sign at a Little League game, or those signs that are on the back, how do we impact, beyond telling our server where we go to church? Sometimes I even think we've gone back to a restaurant and asked for the same server. We've gotten the same server again. And to me, that's an extra layer. It's not just a one-off, but then you kind of start developing, oh, by the way, we gave you good marks, and there's, when they start seeing that you're not just a tourist, especially in this area, then you can kind of develop. I've even thought about, again, in this area, and we're the Disney crazy people, but if as much as we go, there are probably workers there that we would see time and time again that you could develop relationships with, and kind of impact. Not just for the purpose of immediately like, oh, if they're not going to come to church, there's no point in us talking, but just connecting with people, just impacting. Sometimes just a comment will lift somebody up and help them. It will create a doorway. Sometimes it's maybe a plant a seed that somebody else at some point will reap. So that's one of your homework. That's some of our homework, and it's as much for me as anybody else. Lee only has 2 more to go back and try to, I'll give you these sheets and we'll fill these out and figure out who are our neighbors. On a kindergarten level, the first level, as we're talking here, who are our physical neighbors? Our 8 houses around us. What are their names? What's a little bit more about them? And that's a little scary because some people are so guarded, especially right now. How do you do that? There are some people that don't want to talk to you because of COVID. Or they're just guarded. They just don't open the door. When I was inviting people to church, I hit several of the Ring doorbells. Well, the Ring doorbells, they can see who's there. And they can act like they're not home. There's no element of surprise. It's not like when my grandparents were growing up and everybody hung out on the porch. You walked by and started up a conversation. So there are some ways that we can put ourselves out there and kind of meet people. But anyway, that's our homework for next week. George is watching, and he says we could also ask people in our community to help us carry out community projects. I've spoken to somebody recently who is doing vaccine drives. They're doing vaccine drives with their neighbors and their communities. They're bringing people together. Those are some ways that you get to know people. Just whatever the need is. You see the need, you feel the need, you develop a relationship. So how do we become a good neighbor? The first step is learning people's names. And then we can go down that list of our communication levels. Talk about the facts. I've lived here for a year. We like this, and then you go into the feelings. We love this area. It's a great area. And those are things that we can remember for Sunday morning when we have visitors. What's your name? Where are you from? How do you like Florida? Those are the 3 levels, and then you engage somebody. I also tell Natalie, my daughter, it's music to somebody's ears when you ask them to tell you about them. When you act interested in what they have to say. Your story. Everybody's got a story. And the people that my favorite people in the world are the ones who are interested in what I have to say. And so that's a big deal. We don't just throw questions out. We listen, and we are interested in their story. So next week, after we see the results, we'll think about what are some things we can do to improve how we engage, and how can we love, and how can we serve our neighbor. When we say serve, and we've used this term for a few months, serve doesn't necessarily mean it could mean that we carry food over. It could mean that we help them with a project, they're painting or they're building something. Those are some things, but serving could just be listening. Serving could be esteeming them and letting them know they have value by listening, by being affected by what they have to say. So, truly understanding our call to love the people next door can be hard, especially considering the independent culture that we live in today. Everything seems more isolated. As I've mentioned, our grandparents' era is sitting on the porch, especially before air conditioning. You sat on the porch because it was cool, and that created an environment of community. And when you're walking by somebody's house and they're out on the porch, they're cooking something or whatever. But now, especially here in Orlando, air conditioning is a beautiful thing. But when it was invented, it changed community. There's a book that I read about that, just how the South was, how people migrated to the South, the hot South, and how it brought all things indoors. Think also about how people's houses have changed. My brother pointed this out once, that our house that I grew up in had a big living room and small bedrooms. Big living room, companies coming. People are going to be here. We're going to host people. Houses now, they put more emphasis on like the master suite. They almost divide up. I've been in some houses with some tiny living rooms and big master bedrooms. Why is that? Why has that changed? Because we don't visit like we used to. Company doesn't drop in like they used to. So those are the things that we have to kind of navigate. We have to, if those are not, and that's probably the way that the church God of Prophecy grew, back in our grandparents' day and our parents' day, meeting in homes and big areas in their living room. So if that is not the method that people are doing now, then what is? How do we meet the needs, and how do we meet people? A lot of people would say the internet. And so we're doing everything we're doing, we're augmenting from the internet. But we've learned over the past year and a half that it doesn't take the place of real community. It doesn't take the place of one-on-one. And if I send Karen a message and I say, hey, how you doing? And she says, I'm doing great. But I don't see her face, But she comes in here and I'm doing great, and you can see it in her eyes that she's not doing great. That's what we're missing. We're missing the opportunity to follow up. We're getting, what online communication has kind of done is shifted us back into more of the facts mode rather than the feelings. Well, we feel strongly about things. I'm not saying we don't express that online, but we're able to hide our feelings more, our real feelings, online. because nobody can check us on it. Nobody can see through what we're saying. Another thing I was thinking as I was reading this and I was putting this together, and this is just an extra, but if we got pretty outraged or pretty excited about something happening in the community, we might go to our neighbors and tell them about it. We would break those communication barriers. So my conviction is the good news is the most exciting news that we could share. That's the hope that we need to be sharing with people, and it's much more important than saying, did you see what happened to that house down the street or whatever? We don't have any hesitation about breaking or starting a relationship or conversation with somebody about trivial things, but for some reason the most important thing we can talk about, we just get a little bit hung up on it. And we need God to help us to move past that. We need God to help us become more comfortable. And those of us who are not comfortable doing it, those of us who don't do it a lot, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. Many of us work from home. Leanne works from home. Many of us have online friendships, and they're too busy to meet new people. We're going to see how worrying about more than ourselves can help put us back on track to become the kind of neighbors God has called us to be. When the shutdown happened, that was an opportunity for us to go to our neighbors, and we did at least one, because Southside blessed us with so many great household items before the shutdown. It was perfect. We had a whole closet full of toilet paper. When everybody was worried about toilet paper, we had a closet full. We almost felt bad and was going to bring it back in case anybody here at the church needed it, because the shortages. But I did mention it to our neighbors. Do you need toilet paper? We've got a bunch. Don't go without. Because at that point they would not have accepted food. Everybody was nervous about food. But they probably would have accepted toilet paper. They said they were good, so we were fine. But just seeing the need and being able to serve other people. Anybody have any other ideas? How can you break into communication with somebody seeing a need? I read an article the other day. Sometimes we step outside our comfort zone and volunteer to coach, a baseball team, a little league, or we volunteer to do this. Some people volunteer to be big brother, big sister, just things that get them outside of their zone. Leanne and I, we had our first child here in Winter Park. We were in a class full of people, a bunch of people that we did not have any other connection with whatsoever. And some of them were strange, I'll never forget, I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. There was one guy, they were going around the table, and just icebreaker, and they say, if you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be? And the typical answers were Bahamas, on a beach. I would love to be in London right now. I would like to be at home in the bed. And one guy, just as serious as he could be, he said, outer space. And just said it like that, just outer space. I just thought it was the funniest thing, Who thinks, if you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be? Outer space. Okay. And he's a daddy now, by the way, whoever that guy is. But there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for us to meet each other and hang out and all go eat afterwards or whatever, but that was a cross-section of people. And so we can look at opportunities like that. Where can we get in a cross-section of people? Is there a class that we take here in town, or some kind of community organization, a meeting that we can join, something where we meet people outside of our circle, because people outside of our circle are the people that need the gospel, you know. So it's almost like the small group mentality. You raise up a small group, that small group's going good, you start a new small group to impact new people. Well, we can look at our church as these are people who've been impacted by our church. So how do we step outside this circle for a moment into another circle where we can impact more people to join this circle or to be a part of Jesus's kingdom? Anybody get anything they want to say? Because I'll finish up here.
Just the benefit of sitting next to the microphone. So, there's a couple of things that I found make it really easy to meet neighbors. One of them is having little kids. When there's other little kids in the neighborhood, you pretty much meet parents of all the other little kids, which works out really well. It also, I meet a ton of people walking the dog. I'll be out with my dog and they're out with their dog. And I met a guy, was it yesterday? Just out in the neighborhood. I mean, I know all kinds of things about him. Had a stroke in his eye, can't see out of it. He sells chemicals from imports from Europe and was on a flight when I don't know his name. I know his dog's name, but you can meet all kinds of people when you're out walking your dog or if your kids are in the neighborhood. Last year, Natalie was coming home from a field trip, and so I brought the girls over to let them play on the playground while we were waiting for the bus to come in. And there were several other moms doing that, and so we just got to talking and meeting each other. It was a fascinating conversation. I actually posted about it because they were all from India. So they were all talking about, you know, where they buy their food and which caste their family belonged to, and you know, all that. It's really, really fascinating. And so that was definitely outside of my circle, my typical circle. But I'm still friends with one of them. The girls do theater together. So there's ways. But you know, if I didn't have a dog, if I didn't have kids, it would be a lot harder. So. But just those little icebreakers make it a little easier to get out in the surrounding area.
So the moral of the story is to get a dog, Lee. Okay? Go to the shelter this week. Go to the shelter, go to the kennel, pick you out one.
I'll borrow yours.
Go ahead. I think so.
Okay. DeWayne, I think a big part of the problem now that we're faced with is we're not used, as you say, it was just automatic. People every Sunday would just gather at somebody's home back in the day, and you'd hang out and so forth. And now we're faced with the challenge to find the opportunity, and we're not used to that. We're used to the opportunities just being thrown at us, and they're there right in front of us. We meet, we greet, we talk, and wherever we're at. But now it's different. People are turning away. They're not gathering together at all. So it's a challenge it's a new challenge for the church. What are some ways that we can still have community or create community in this particular environment? And I was thinking as you were saying that that we're hosting I don't even know what it is, but something that you and Leanne arranged to host this summer.
Yeah.
And there's going to be maybe 40 people here for the whole week using our church during the summertime, and they're paying for it, of course, but that's a great opportunity. And I already told DeWayne that him and I are going to be here, and others that we might even decide to do a little serving or something. But it's folks. Again, I don't know what it is exactly, but enacting or drama club. Drama camp.
Yeah.
And they've asked if they could use our facility, about 20 drama people, and every day for half a day. And I think, it's things like that, and that just fell upon you. So I think, but you're looking. You're the kind that you look for something. And so we've got a great grace story to tell, but I think now greater than any other time we have to look for the opportunity to share it. It's not just going to fall in our lap as easily as it has done in the past. Does that make sense?
Right. And we don't think, I think people are more outspoken online now, and they're more evangelistic, like on their Facebook feed. But that doesn't impact people like befriending people and serving people.
Right.
That's just sharing your opinion in a sea of other opinions, and we all know people who say, I changed my mind because of a Facebook post. Not, it just doesn't happen. So we have to look outside. I think people mean well, and I think in their heart they're like, I'm going to express, and I'm not saying you don't express your faith online, but there's something special about seeing people face to face and holding their hands or putting your arm around them or something and really showing a human connection. Anybody got anything else for that? I'll move on if not. How would you describe the message of the Good Samaritan in your own words? How would we describe it? What parts of the parable can you identify with the most? You can think about that. And what character do you relate to? Anybody want to answer one of those? The Good Samaritan, as we mentioned, is Jesus' way of broadening the idea of neighbor to include our enemies, to include the people that we would say that are untouchable, that would give us an excuse not to reach. Well, they're not even like me, And there are patterns that we get into. Again, we get in comfortable circles where we're only reaching people that are like us. We want community, people like us. As those of us who have kids, the social system changes once you have kids. If you had single friends or if you had friends without kids, then those social systems change a little bit once you have them because they're not accustomed to having kids. You're accustomed to having kids. And so your opportunities change. You're not going to go see a shoot-'em-up movie as a double date anymore. Or you have to coordinate with babysitter, whatever. It's all more. So those are how that changes, and then we change as more comfortable we get into our circles. It's harder to break outside of that. So how did the priest and the Levite react to the wounded man on the road? Anybody want to just say it out? You don't have to stand up. Ignored him.
Not my problem.
Right, not my problem. How do you see these same attitudes in our culture today? Do we see those same attitudes in our culture today? 100%.
More so than ever.
Right. And what do we say? When we see people in need today, sometimes our first reaction, our human reaction is, they brought it on themselves somehow. Not my problem. And then we also have fear. You see somebody on the side of the road, their car's broke down, and every scary movie you've ever seen flashes in your mind when you're thinking about stopping and helping them. You're thinking, okay, this person is Jeffrey Dahmer. This is how they get people. That's fear. Those are excuses for us to ignore them. And those excuses were present in the story of the Good Samaritan. Those are probably all the emotions that people had. Sometimes guilt by association. You're helping somebody and somebody else walks by and says, what are you doing with that person? Being a good neighbor can be uncomfortable. I want to check the time here. Ooh, wow, almost. It can be uncomfortable because it can cost us, and there's often a risk involved. But what did the Samaritan's actions show us about being a good neighbor?
He was willing to pay the cost.
He was willing to take the risk. He was willing to pay the cost because he saw someone in need. It's easy to write somebody off. It's easy to create a wall between us and them because it just is. You don't hear somebody's story and you think of them as, sometimes you don't even think of other people as human, you know. But they are our brothers and our sisters, and they have a story. I shared in a small group last week about a guy who had been coming to our group in Cleveland when I was there before, and he was a little quirky, and people, you know, anytime you have a singles group, we were involved in a singles group, and you have older single women, and an older single man comes, unless that guy comes in like Magnum PI, you know, or somebody that they just swoon over, they shy away from him. You know, he's quirky, he's weird or whatever, and I don't want to be in a room alone with him or whatever. And he was quirky, you know, but he shared his story with me one day, and it was terrible. It was a terrible story that he grew up with. I mean, just jaw-dropping story that he shares in his testimony, that when he was a kid, his dad woke him up in the middle of the night, beating him with a baseball bat on the head, and had already killed his mother with that baseball bat, saying that God told him to kill them because they were possessed of demons. So he was 12 years old, ran outside of his house, blood pouring out of his head from his dad, and the police came and got his dad before he was able to kill him. And this is how this guy grew up. And so he comes to our singles group, and we're like, we don't understand him. He doesn't talk like us. He doesn't act like us. Well, no kidding. You know, the guy deserves a medal just for coming to church. You don't know everything that has brought him to that point. And when you hear that story, when you hear his testimony and what God has done in his life, you celebrate him because your perspective changes. And that's how it is with our neighbors. That's how it is when we hear somebody's story and we see them as human. We see what God has done through their whole life, or what the enemy has done through their life that they have overcome, that God has helped them overcome. So that's what we need to do. And our first assignment this week is learning people's names. And then we're going to learn their stories. And that's how we're going to serve people. That's how we're going to impact our neighbors and our communities, by learning people's names, learning their stories, sharing our stories, but more than anything, listening to their stories and showing them value and showing them worth. So that's what, did you have something else you want to say?
I will say that we did that here, DeWayne, before you came. A guy named DJ, and I picked him up in the parking lot, and you remember he had holes in his ear. I've never seen anything like that, and he frightened me. And I know several came to me. I brought him to my home and said, "Oh, we're worried about you, Pastor." And
Right.
I just threw it off, but I did lock my bedroom door and I put my baseball bat on my bed.
Yeah.
That I didn't let on that it locked, but I was aware of it. But then he came to church, and it made us uncomfortable a little bit for a little while. Now he's just doing so good as a Christian, but it brought uncomfortableness in
Right.
our midst, and that's a drastic situation. Other things won't be so uncomfortable. But and another point that I thought of is I think we have to learn to look in the ditch. Not look
Right.
past
That's
it.
good. Look at the
If
ditch.
we don't look in the ditch, we're not going to even see the ditch. And those guys were going by. When you say ignored, they didn't even look in there.
Right.
They passed him by. And I think we're on our way to heaven, and sometimes we're not looking in the ditch to see who we might help. And when you say the ditch, that doesn't mean someone's totally destitute. If you don't know Jesus, you're in the ditch.
Right.
So I think it's a thing of attitude of just really looking, how can I be what God wants me to be this week in this crazy world? And somehow He'll show us how.
Right. And showing somebody they have worth, and they're suffering, and we can't alleviate the suffering a lot of times, but we can have proximity. You know, we can be there. Isn't that an educator's thing? I've heard that if you have trouble in the classroom or somebody's having problems, by a teacher just being there beside them, it helps calm the problem. They feel like somebody is there. And when you're going through a hard time, you take note. You don't want to, but your mind takes note of who is there and who's not. You know, it's human nature. You know what friends came when you went through a hard time. And it makes a lot of difference. Just, again, establishing worth, knowing people's names, and then being there when they need them. So, thank you all for joining us online. We appreciate it. It's a Wednesday night Bible study. I'll talk about some of this next week as well. We're talking about loving and serving our neighbors and being a servant and impacting our communities. We want to remind you again about Sunday morning at 9 and 11. We had a great Sunday last week. We're going to have another great Sunday this week. Car wash on Saturday at 11 at Tijuana Flats. Next week is a busy week. Next week we have other things on Saturday. I think we have a men's fellowship next Saturday morning, a week from Saturday morning, and then 2 weeks from Saturday morning is the women's tea at 2 in the afternoon. And that will be here. It will be live streamed here, but you can also, you can be here in person. So people are going to be sponsoring tables, right? And you're going to decorate tables and things like that. So it'll be a nice little thing. It's really nice for us to start doing some of these things again, not just online, but actually being present around people. Seems like there's something else. Oh, that morning will be that morning won't be drive-through prayer, will it? It will be. 9 o'clock that morning, drive-through prayer, and then we'll do drive-through prayer 10 to noon, and then the women's tea at 2 o'clock. That's right. Okay. Thank you all. I'll just say a prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Dear God, thank you for this story. Thank you, Lord, for helping us to see ourselves in this story and to showing us, God, how we can impact others, and for sharing your heart with us and how you can enable us to extend your supernatural love to them. Help us, Lord. Give us opportunities. Make us aware of the opportunities, God. Just tug at our hearts. Holy Spirit, open doors for us to impact other people with relationships and to love other people, God. To love them as you love them. Help us, Lord. Enable us with your Spirit, Lord, to love them as you love them. And we love you tonight, God. Help us, Lord, as we strive to impact this community. In your name we pray. Amen.